Do you know the first official visit of Japanese government officials to North America and Europe? In the fall of 1613, a delegation was sent across the Pacific with the express purpose of discussing trade agreements with the Spanish and also meeting the Pope. Japanese citizens had visited North America and Europe before, but this was the first time it involved a government official. The ship was called the San Juan Bautista. Its construction was overseen by experts who had been trained by William Adams, the man who provided Japan with long-range ship technology. The head of the mission was Hasakura Rokuemon Tsunenaga, a samurai who was a retainer of Date Masamune, the daimyo in charge of the Tohoku region in northern Japan. The reason for Tsunenaga is that Masamune was in charge of the entire project. It included a number of samurai, tradesmen, and about 40 southern barbarians, as the Japanese referred to the Europeans. The most notable barbarians were the explorer Vizcaíno and a Franciscan friar named Luis Sotelo. The ship left from northern Japan in either September or October, depending on if you're looking at Japanese or non-Japanese records. The confusion relates to the lunar calendar and how historical dates are referenced in Japanese history. It is notable, though, that there was a perception issue between Spain and Japan on the voyage. For Japan, it was an issue of trade, particularly for Masamune, whose area was resource poor and saw allowing Christianity into northern Japan as a way of creating business. For the Spanish, it was a way to spread Catholicism in northern Japan, with trade being secondary. And this is where history gets interesting. Some records paint this voyage as an individual operation by Masamune. Others say it was authorized by the Tokugawa shogunate as an overall strategy. There is no way that Masamune did this without the knowledge and approval of the Tokugawa. Unfortunately, relations regarding Catholicism were about to reach a boiling point. The entourage reached Acapulco, the first stop on its multi-year voyage, on January 25th, 1614. The Tokugawa exclusion edict was released on February 14th, 1614, roughly 3 weeks after the entourage arrived in Acapulco. Once in Acapulco, the Japanese delegation was welcomed, but they were stuck until an itinerary was developed. Fights broke out between the Japanese and the Spanish, with one Spanish soldier actually being stabbed by a samurai. The main source on the visit comes from a Nahuatl historian named Chimopain, and I hope I pronounced those words correctly. The resolution was that while Hasakura and 8 of his samurai would be allowed to continue to carry their swords, the rest would be deprived of them until they left. Also, the Japanese merchants were allowed to begin to sell their goods. On March 24th, the delegation reached Mexico City. Hasakura stayed at the convent of San Francisco and met with the viceroy. He explained the proposal to meet King Philip and formalize trade relations between Japan and New Spain. The delegation spent a few months in Mexico City, with 42 of them being baptized and 63 being confirmed in April of that year. Hasakura was not one of them, as he planned to be baptized in Spain. The next destination was Veracruz, where the embassy would begin its voyage towards Europe. About half the Japanese did not voyage to Europe. Some of them were to remain in New Spain, trade goods, and wait for the delegation to return. And some of them would go back to Acapulco to board the San Juan Bautista and return to Japan, along with other Japanese traders who had already been in New Spain for 4 years. So on June 10th, Hasakura and his delegation left Veracruz. They would spend 6 days in Havana, where they would change ships before heading on to Europe. In 2001, Cuba erected a statue to commemorate the samurai's visit. Hasakura's group landed at Sanlúcar de Barrameda, a port in what is now southern Spain, in October of 1614. They reached Seville on October 23rd, ready to further the discussion of expanding trade. Also in October, the group in Acapulco left, headed for Japan. They arrived in April of 1615, likely following the currents and stopping in the Philippines along the way. Once there, they learned that many Christians had sided in a rebellion against Tokugawa, the missionaries had been evicted, and their Christian faith was under attack. As I mentioned in the previous part, the entourage reached Seville on October 23rd, 1614, ready to discuss the expansion of trade. The group is often called the Keicho Embassy, named after the era being used to measure time back in Japan. From Seville, they went to Madrid and arrived there on January 30th, 1615. Once there, they met with King Philip. Tsunenaga brought a letter to King Philip from Date Masamune and requested a treaty. The king responded that he would do what he could. Keeping to his promise of being baptized in Spain, Tsunenaga was baptized at the convent of Las Descalzas Reales. He was renamed Felipe Francisco Hasakura, and the Duke of Lerma served as his godfather. From there, the group traveled across Spain while waiting for permission to go to Rome. The group received the permission in August of that year and left that same month. The Japanese embassy boarded 3 Spanish frigates to sail across the Mediterranean and towards Italy. Bad weather would force a stop in Saint-Tropez, France, where they would spend a few days. Reports on the visit include mentions of the Japanese embassy using chopsticks instead of their hands, how sharp their swords were, and the really odd custom of using tissue paper to blow their noses. The meeting is considered the first official visit between Japan and France. The embassy eventually reached Rome on September 20th, 1615, with the plan of meeting the Pope and spreading the Christian faith. Back in Japan, the Tokugawa eliminated their last remaining opposition in the Siege of Osaka, which ended in June of 1615. This quashed any initial hope of a Christian resurgence within the country. So while Tsunenaga was talking about Japan opening itself to Christianity, word of the persecutions were already headed back towards Europe. Tsunenaga and his delegation reached Rome on September 20th, 1615. Once there, Tsunenaga and his group met with one of the cardinals, but it would be November 3rd before they met with Pope Paul V in an audience that was attended by many cardinals, bishops, and nobles. During the meeting, Tsunenaga gave the Pope 2 letters, one in Japanese and one in Latin. The letters requested a trade treaty between Japan and New Spain, and also requested that more Christian missionaries be sent to Japan. As the consultant missionary, Luis Sotolo was Franciscan. The request was specific for Franciscan missionaries, a prime example of the ongoing competition between various orders. The Pope agreed to send missionaries, but said the treaty was Spain's decision. The meeting complete, Tsunenaga and his entourage headed back for Spain. According to some reports, Tsunenaga himself was made a noble and received citizenship. In Spain, Tsunenaga again met with King Philip in April of 1616. By that time, other information from Japan had arrived in Spain. The information detailed 2 things. 1, Philip now understood that Tsunenaga was a retainer of Date Masamune, and not a direct report to the ruler of Japan, Tokugawa Ieyasu. 2, the king had learned that Ieyasu had kicked the missionaries out of the country and now was persecuting the Christian faith. For these reasons, King Philip declined to sign a treaty. The mission returned to Seville and left for New Spain in June of 1616. Back in Japan, Ieyasu, the ruling shogun who was still running things, died that same month. This doomed whatever hope the mission had left, as his son, Tokugawa Hidetada, a man with extreme distrust of foreigners, was now officially in charge. Tsunenaga and his entourage used the same route home that they had taken to go to Europe. They would stop briefly in Havana, Cuba on the return trip, and then they eventually reached New Spain. They would spend several months in New Spain, journeying back to Acapulco. The San Juan Bautista, the ship that had brought them from Japan, had made a second trip across the Pacific and was waiting to carry them home. On the second voyage, the ship had come loaded with pepper, as well as lacquerware from Kyoto. These items were sold in New Spain. However, to prevent an exodus of silver from the country, the Japanese were required to buy local goods to take home. They were allowed to leave with only 20,000 silver pesos, split between Tsunenaga and the captain of the vessel, Yokozawa Shogun, who had been baptized while waiting for Tsunenaga to return. The ship followed the Spanish trade routes home, first stopping in Manila in the Philippines in April of 1618. There, European animosities intervened, owing to potential battles with non-Catholic powers. The Spanish government acquired the ship, which was of excellent construction. A new ship was constructed, and Tsunenaga purchased goods that he knew his daimyo, Date Masamune, would find interesting. Tsunenaga reached Nagasaki in August of 1620. Finally, he was back in Japan. From Nagasaki, he headed north, towards Sendai, and his home province in the Tohoku region. Tsunenaga possibly understood little of the changes and martyrdoms now going on. He would learn 2 days after he arrived in Sendai. Once in Sendai, Tsunenaga presented his report and his gifts to his daimyo, Date Masamune, whose reaction was mixed, likely due to the politics playing out in Japan. It is not known what Tsunenaga said. Some historians have speculated that Tsunenaga may have proposed an alliance between Masamune and Western powers with the goal of taking over Japan. This is something that supposedly had been proposed to one other high-ranking Japanese official in the past. In both instances, such a suggestion would have met with disdain, if not disbelief. It did not matter. The trip to North America and Europe was now being seen as Masamune's venture, and not something approved by the government. Because of this, Masamune appeared to start taking steps to show that he was in line with the dictates of the current shogun, Tokugawa Hidetada. Within 2 days, an edict was announced against the Christians in Sendai. First, Christians were ordered to abandon their faith. High-ranking refusers would be exiled. Commoners who refused would be executed. Second, denouncing any Christians in hiding would earn a reward. And third, those that spread Christianity were told to give up the faith or leave Sendai. Masamune sent a letter to Hidetada, reminding him that the trip had been created with assistance, gifts, and messages from the shogun. It did not matter. Christians were martyred in Sendai 40 days after Tsunenaga's return. It did not matter. A sovereign nation, worried about a foreign government using religion to usurp the country, was doing everything it could to keep that foreign religion out under penalty of death. Japan, the jewel of Christian missionary efforts in the Far East, was becoming as forbidden as the Garden of Eden. The one thing left to discuss is an epilogue of some of the major players. Despite being loyal, Date Masamune remained under suspicion for the rest of his life. His persecution of Christians, though, was seen as mild compared to the rest of the country, and historians speculate that Masamune's wife and one of his daughters may have been Christian, even though he was not. Luis Sotelo, the Franciscan missionary who was an advisor on the trip, was burned at the stake in Japan in 1624. Tokugawa Hidetada retired as shogun in 1623, running things from behind the scenes as his father had done. His son Tokugawa Iemitsu rose to the throne. It was Iemitsu who established Japan's policy of isolation, allowing only the Dutch to trade goods from Europe. As for Hasakura Tsunenaga, he retired, taking home many Catholic items that he acquired on the voyage to his personal estate. He died of illness in 1622. It is believed he remained a Christian until his death. His gravesite, though unknown, has been narrowed down to 3 possibilities. Tsunenaga's son, Tsuneyori, was executed for hiding Christians, but not for being one. His other son, Tsunemichi, was convicted of Christianity, but managed to escape the country. The sons do go by other names, but I've decided on the ones I use here. A number of the servants were tortured for their faith and executed. In 1640, the family was stripped of its holdings, with the Christian items confiscated by the Date. Tsunenaga's grandson, Tsunenobu, managed to start a new family line. The confiscated items reappeared 2 centuries later. The story of the voyage also reemerged in the 19th century, when a Japanese delegation to Europe in the 19th century was shown records of the voyage in Venice, Italy. There are statues of Tsunenaga in Mexico, Cuba, Spain, and Italy. There are also descendants of the passengers in some of the places where he visited. Japan honors him with the model of the ship in the port where the voyage began. Novelist Endo Shusaku, the author of Silence, also wrote a work called The Samurai, which is based on the voyage. If you like my Japanese history snippets, please follow, subscribe, like, and share my videos. And if you like books set in medieval Japan, please check out my works. Thank you very much.